and welcome to the
Champagne Room Secrets podcast.
What the fuck? I don't know if this is shameful, but if you have a small dick, have a good personality.
Failing the champagne.
Your wife died? Here, have a titty.
Not a sex podcast,
But it
a
is.
stripper
You can
place.
grind your clit on a guy's hard dick and
Okay,
come.
but you've never made someone come in their pants, right? I'm Candy,
I'm Jade.
your friendly neighborhood whores here to walk you through the ins and outs of the strip club and sex work industry.
Uncensored. And we're very happy to have a guest here today. She is a sex worker, comedian, sex worker rights activist, and host of the Oldest Profession podcast, Kaytlin Bailey. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me on the show. It's an honor and delight to be here.
We are so delighted.
I know, and I say I love your voice. Do you get that a lot?
Thank
That your
you.
voice is like really sultry and like nice to listen to.
I appreciate that. It's one of the very few upsides to having smoked once a long time ago.
Oh, one time.
Actually, no, I don't think that's true. That's a mischaracterization. That's not how this happened. This happened because I am the only daughter of a soldier who can't hear above a certain pitch. And then I did the debate team at a formative time when they were like, before we were like, hey, telling people to speak lower is sexist. So,
Great.
so I was just raised in that, like, to be heard, lower your register.
Oh my
So,
God, like Elizabeth Holmes.
heard of
Kind
that.
of.
Yeah.
But she
Yeah.
forgot that now. She's like, oh my God, wait, you guys, I was kidding this whole time.
I know she's like, I'm just a pregnant lady. You can't. We love women and children.
Yeah.
Childlike women, sign me up.
Oh, we talk about that a lot here on Champagne Room Secrets.
Yeah, it's only fun as a character, really.
Oh my gosh.
Role play.
That's great. I should practice that. Like, I'm often told I talk too high and excited.
Yeah, you say hello and people immediately are like, no.
No, literally. Like when I used to dance more at clubs, I walk up, I'm like, hi guys. And they're like, ugh. What are you doing?
Ugh. Oh God. That kind of behavior should get you kicked out of a joint like that. Like if we lived in a more just world, also that voice would be fine.
Exactly.
But you know,
exactly.
yeah. And that would never happen.
Yeah.
But you've never stripped, right?
I've never stripped.
No, when I talk to other sex workers, they're kind of like shocked at like what the strip club
Oh.
behavior is allowed. And usually we kind of expect it to be the opposite. Like,
Right.
oh, there's like strip club security. And I'm like, no, we get told a lot of shit. We get like our boundaries crossed all the time. And they're kind of like, ew. Why?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Kaytlin,
Yeah.
what was your first foray into sex work?
Yeah, I was just saying, I was like, I feel like I should talk about my my background because it's really different. I think like the landscape has changed so much. But I did sex work for like two different distinct periods of my life. I did hourly escorting work in like the golden age when we had flip phones and Craigslist erotic services and like message boards, and it was like enough interconnection that you clients and sex workers could find each other, but not so much surveillance that like, you know, they were suggesting your like sex worker character to your mom on social media and other such
Mhm.
nonsense, right? So I did hourly escorting work, had a very positive experience both with clients and other sex workers. A lot of that was due to I was like literally in high school being paid an allowance with like no survival needs to meet. This was like an exercise in curiosity. And so I was very quick to turn down clients, and like the stakes were low. And so I did all the safety precautions and did that. Then I went to college and had a different kind of experience with like the hookup culture and what happens when you give free sex to your peers.
Yeah. I was listening to your thoughts on that actually recently. Yeah.
Yeah, it's weird, right?
Yeah.
It's like, hey guys, So, and then I graduated from college into the like 2008, 2009 financial crisis depression. I did professional advocacy with like this progressive political consulting firm. I ran field campaigns for like progressive causes and organizations, and then got like really burned out on that really quickly. I think that was like one of my first brushes with like, oh, this is what exploitation feels like. Gross.
The first brush, even though you had already
Done the most
no, totally,
exploitative
sex work,
job ever, but this is the first. Yeah.
It was.
She's doing
Yeah,
quotes.
it was awesome. Yeah, of
Right.
course. Yeah, I hear, and that was like that informed like so much of my early stand-up comedy of like, this thing is not what you think it is. And so, but then when I quit politics and started trying to do comedy, which is like, if I thought politics was exploitative, I mean, like, Jesus, like, hold my beer, said the entertainment industry. So, yeah, I came back to sex work to do sugaring, which was just getting popular at that time, in order to subsidize my career in comedy, and like had these really sort of honest transactional conversations with men who were like, it's exciting to be a part of someone's life who's like trying to do something. I want to spend time with you. I can give you this financial security that makes it easier for you to do this thing. Like, let's do that. And they really entered the role of like patron, and that felt great. And I also understand is not what sugaring has become. That is no longer the vibe, but that relationship took me into my career as a sex worker rights advocate and doing communications, and now starting my own organization, this nonprofit media company, and doing the Oldest Profession podcast and my live show and all of the stuff that I do now.
Wow, that is incredible. I know I have so many questions. I just want to like go back really quick because I'm sorry. Escort in high school. Let's talk about that. So you are not. Wait, I'm sorry, but you were in New York. So the age of consent.
No, I was in North Carolina.
Oh, okay.
So I moved. I moved to New York in like 2011 to do politics and comedy, and and that's where I sugared. So I did escort work in like Raleigh, Durham, right?
So you were most likely then a minor getting into this industry.
I like to say I was practically 18 years old, and I was 7 months older than my dad was.
Let's not incriminate our guests here.
No. I think we should address this head on. But like, I was a full 7 months older than my father was when he joined the army. So sure, technically underage, blah, blah, blah. But like, if we want to have this conversation, let's really have it. I felt like I was a consenting adult enough.
Like, I think people have this idea that when people get into it very young, they've been like trafficked, they have like a pimp or whatever, but you had like full agency. You were like, I want to do this job. Let's fucking do it with my little flip phone. We're going to get out there.
I was posting my own ads and lying to clients about my age. Like, if anyone, maybe I was trafficking myself, but I think only Alaska is still prosecuting people for that.
Were people in your network doing it, or how did you even come up with the idea? Because I feel like so much of high school is like what your peers are doing, that like that never even occurred to me. Like in high school, you know what I mean? I was taking AP classes and like whatever the people around me were doing,
Yeah. I mean, so was I, right? And so, and college release is what allowed me to have the time that I needed to like see clients and do all of this work. But it really originated with my obsession with sex workers in history, right? Like, I was reading about courtesans and good time girls, and these women that had, to me, it felt like they had a cheat code to misogyny. And so I saw the sexism around me. I was growing up at the height of George W. Bush's purity culture in a like deeply evangelical culture. It was nonsense. And so sex work, it felt like this other way. And I actually believed, because I was a young person, that like you couldn't do sex work in Raleigh, North Carolina. I thought you had to like go to New York or LA or London or like a real city in order like to be an actress. It did not occur to me until much later that we are everywhere, actually.
Yeah. So that is just so impressive. Like Jada was saying, I mean, like I didn't even have sexual relation, well, not with a man, until like into college. And like I was just so like not aware. And the fact that like you were so interested in that and like turned it into a job that early, that is just like so impressive.
Thank you. I think it does show some aptitude, right? Like I think that I even looking back, right, even as an adult person, I was like, that was smart. Like, it was very unlikely that you were going to be killed or have something bad happen to you. You took a lot of smart precautions. And also, and this is just stuff that like we're getting into therapy now, I was looking for an escape route, right? Like I wanted a double life. I wanted to step into this other character that had a lot more power. Like when we were doing these sessions, and I think it's interesting that you talk about, the dynamics of the strip club are very different. That is a sales job in a way that being an escort, an independent escort, really isn't, and so like I got to dictate the terms. I got to articulate my boundaries. I got to, execute real power when in my daily life as a minor in high school, I had very little agency.
Yeah, no, and I think that is an interesting dichotomy that for a lot of us, like outside of her sex worker role, we don't feel like we can
Speak up for
sometimes like
ourselves.
put boundaries. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And like I think Candy and I were talking about this the other day. Like I agree that the strip club is a different environment 100%, and you are kind of like more people pleasy because you're trying to sell. But
Yeah.
once you're in the room, in the VIP room, we talked about this. Like sometimes guys think because they pay that they're in control of what happens in there, but it's the complete opposite because I can end that room whenever
It's
I
your
want.
space. Yeah.
Usually, if you have a good club, they'll back you up if you're like, hey, this guy did this, and they'll kick him out or whatever.
Sure.
But yeah, that's something that like a lot of women don't find outside of those spaces of sex work.
Yeah, you know, I remember when I was coming up as a stand-up comic, it's going to bother me that I can't remember his name, but this is someone who I admire's joke. And he would say like, yeah, you know, it's great. I love going to strip clubs where, you know, men show the women some respect. And that was like definitely my experience as a female young stand-up comedian. Like I felt more like prey in that context than I ever did as a sex worker.
Yeah, and that's what you hear from female comedians, right? Like, yeah, a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, there's no HR in comedy, for better and for worse. You know, that's one of the things that I think is so fascinating about this conflation with sex work and human trafficking or violence against women, because not only is there not the violence people think that there is in adult consensual sex work, but there is that violence just in our dating life. And so having this like topsy-turvy, you know, what is up is down is up definition that conflates and reverses these things is not only are we sicking, right, like state violence on sex workers, but we're also depriving civilian women of the language that they need to describe the very real sexual violations that are happening all of the time.
Yeah, it's like a
Right.
fucking scam. It's like it's crazy.
It's a scam.
I spend a lot of time on Twitter. I'm like chronically online, and I feel like especially like conservative white women seem to be really obsessed with human trafficking. There's all these like weird like, oh, if there's like a sticker on your car, it means that they want to traffic you and all these things. And I feel like it's kind of like a is a red herring the right word? I'm Mexican.
Yeah, I
so-
think red herring.
I'm
makes sense.
Mexican.
I think sometimes I don't know some things, but like because they are experiencing like the patriarchy like really intensely in those circles, they
Yes.
kind of like obsess over
They
human
see it
trafficking.
everywhere.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, like that.
Yeah.
It's like really weird.
It's just so funny you say that because like that describes my aunt like perfectly. She was obsessed with like kidnapping, trafficking, conspiracy theories, but she had worked as a consensual adult sex worker like as a young mom in the 1960s and 70s, and that's how she like raised her boy. Like she did consensual sex work and also bought into like, I don't know, an early iteration of what would become QAnon.
Yeah, I
That's
don't
crazy.
want to leave out the, the liberals either. Like, so I'm in what I call the burlesque to escort pipeline. So right now I mostly do like full service escorting. And I do like other stuff. I strip sometimes, whatever. But I'm very open, at least like in spaces that's safe. I'm very open about my job to people, and I meet new people. I'm like, oh, like I'm a sex worker, like whatever. And I do have like older, usually white liberal women be like,
Yes.
like, but what are you going to do? How can you get out of this? I'm like, honey, I usually get $1,000 an hour. Like, I don't understand. Like, what is your concern?
Are you being exploited?
Right, exactly. No, but that's my thing.
Yeah.
They're like,
Are you okay?
yeah. I'm like,
Yeah.
honey,
I mean, I
fine."
always go on this rant that like if sex work is exploitative, that's because all work is exploitative. So like why are we
Yeah.
singling out one type of work,
right.
Like
Yeah.
yeah.
Is it really consent if you can't live without money? Like, yeah, that you're so close to seeing the real problem. here.
Yeah,
Right, exactly.
exactly.
I do not consent to sit in front of an Excel spreadsheet for 8 hours.
Yeah. I have people that have done things to get out of law school debt that keeps them up at night and sends them to therapy. Like everyone is making choices on a spectrum of
Yeah.
choice, circumstance, and coercion. Like,
Yeah. And Jade and I
Yeah.
have both been in like different parts of like corporate work, whatever. I'm like, my last tech job that I was fired from, I have never felt more like degraded and humiliated and exploited.
yeah,
And when I got into this, it was like, and yeah, it's not all perfect, whatever, no job is, but it's
course.
like what I have gotten out of it the past I don't know, 2-3 years since I kind of got more into like sex work, like it's just been incredible. Like, and it's not for everybody, but there's just so many misconceptions about it.
I mean, there's so many jobs that I could never imagine myself doing, right? Like, I could never work at a slaughterhouse, right? I would make a terrible farmer. I have demonstrated many times that I am a dog shit waitress, right? There are things that are not for me, but the solution is not to criminalize those things for other people.
Yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of exploitative work, I want to know more about your comedy career.
Yeah.
I do want to get to that. And I want to give more space to the very smart point that Candy made, which is that like liberal white women are just as guilty as with this false conflation. And it remains like a huge disappointment to me that like Gloria Steinem, who for so long was like one of my heroes, has really just doubled down on this idea that we should be arresting people for engaging in prostitution and then that will help somehow. I'm like, you're too smart for this nonsense.
She went undercover at the Playboy Club.
I know. I dressed up as Gloria Steinem undercover for Halloween in college. That's how much I loved her.
That's funny.
I put a Playboy Bunny outfit on and was like, who are you? And I was like, I'm Gloria Steinem.
Oh my God,
like,
very Elle Woods, love.
I always talk about this and like it's not exactly the same, but I used to dance at a strip club and now I dance at a strip club in so like it was like way more liberal, not so much.
Yeah.
And we would get these women who would come into the strip club and give us these little care packages with like tampons and like rubber, like just like these little care packages. And they were like, oh, we're helping you. And I'm like, we make really good money. Like, I think you should be putting this effort into
these
like
meant for a poor person.
Yeah, it's like I just made $600 in the past 30 minutes.
Right. Like there's especially there's like so many unhoused women who could really benefit from like these like nice little care packages, but they're giving it to us because we're like being put up, like making money out of being a sex object, and we need help.
There's just something so like condescending and deeply unhelpful about that. And like, I am so grateful to this work and this movement for helping me see like the white supremacist bullshit behind most charity culture. Because like, I was 100% raised in that, right? Like upper middle class. It's a good thing for us to like march down, make a big show about being at the soup kitchen for an hour or like whatever. Like that thing. And it's so gross to like be on the receiving end of it, of like, you're just wrong about who I am and what I need.
But then we have these church ladies who also come and give us care packages.
Nail
I'm also very confused about that.
I'm like, girl, we all have gel and acrylics. Do not give me a regular nail polish. I'm going to throw it
what am I
away.
going to do with this bullshit? Maybe I can save a pair of tights.
You're just giving me your trash? But yeah, I mean, I'm a huge stand-up comedy fan. I'm assuming you talked about sex work in your act.
I did. I talked about sex work at this very weird period of time in comedy, right? The sort of like free speech extremists, like under Obama, right? Like when it like hit different. And it was a mix of like sex workers and like socially liberal, fiscally like dude bro comics, right? That were like very committed to the gender norms. It was a weird period of time, but I came up in that culture, and several things happened sort of all at the same time. But Donald Trump won in 2016, and that made everything feel different. And then somebody that I had been sort of like in the tutelage of, or who was sort of like mentoring me, threatened to sue me for defamation for talking about some definitely not 100% consensual sex that it turns out I can totally prove happened. And the reaction that I got in this radical free speech area was, yeah, you're not allowed to talk about that. And nobody saw the disconnect between those two things. And so that was a really radicalizing moment for me, where I felt like too mad to be funny. And politics is a perfect place for that energy. So I had sort of been circling, or had been like, acquainted with the sex worker rights movement as a comic. I'd done a couple of conferences. I was out as a sex worker. I'd written a one-woman show about it, and I think some Vice articles. And so I started coming around more, and I ended up accepting the position as the founding director of communications for Decriminalized Sex Work, which is a national advocacy group. Spent a long time talking to legislators, going to conferences, doing a very different kind of performance. And it became really increasingly clear to me that like I could not, that we weren't going to get anywhere good policy wise without really investing in cultural narrative change, that legislators were terrified of their own constituents. And even if you could get them to see it in private, the risks were too high. And so, and also that my skill set is best served, I think, speaking to a broader audience than one cowardly legislator at a time.
No, that's such a good point. It's like when I try to explain, we're a beginner podcast. We've only been around for like a year. But when I try to explain to people like the impact I want to do, it's like I want to like demystify different kinds of work in this job. It's like I really feel like, and Jade and I are very privileged. We both have degrees. Jade has a freaking master's. And like, if I can say this, Jade dropped out of her PhD to like become a stripper. And I like often use that.
Yeah.
What I mean? It's like we are.
Oh, because you didn't want to be exploited by a violent institution?
By academia. Yeah, exactly.
Right, exactly. Because people are just like, what?
Yeah.
Like,
graduate students, they're exploited.
Right. Yeah. So that's amazing to hear you say that. And that was like literally your thought process into like getting more into this, where you're like, no, like I'm going to educate people. We need to like have this like cultural shift to see this work differently.
Yeah, and it's been an interesting sort of like learning curve and adjustment, right? Because like I'm no longer identifying as just a comedian. I'm also like no longer identifying as sort of just an advocate. I'm in this sort of like edutainment space. I feel like we need that and I want to do it. And so that's what's happening.
And you seem very good at it. So that's great.
Thanks. Yeah. And I mean, I locked into like, I would love to tell you that like strategically history is the best way to reach people and, across the political spectrum and the distance of 100 years and blah, 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 blah. But like, I've been obsessed with this stuff since almost as soon as I could read. So this is just what drives me, is this obsession with history and trying to make people see why it matters today, which if you talk to historians, they will tell you that that is a very frustrating way to spend one's life.
I'm gonna skip around on our questions because like this kind of I have been really interested in like collective action among sex workers, and you had the January 25th episode. Like, can you talk a little bit about that?
I love this story. Yes. So we try to celebrate January 25th at Old Pros because it marks not the oldest or the first, because there's no such thing in the oldest profession, but a long ago sex worker led protest against the imminent criminalization of their work. And the way that it happened was this is in 1917. So in the lead up to America's involvement in World War I, when the military was really pushing for local law enforcement to get more serious about repressing prostitution as, disease control, as a national security risk. At the same time, the whole country was still in the midst of what was still called the white slave panic, right? So the white slave law had been passed in 1910. There were all of these movies, right? Like, effectively the, Sound of Freedom of its day, right? Lionizing violence against mostly Black and brown traffickers. And so because of that, there was this Reverend Paul Smith, who had sort of taken it upon himself to rally the local populace against sex workers. And so he was really leading this crusade. And seeing that he was about to win, two madams in the Tenderloin district in San Francisco organized the community, and they marched on his sermon at 10 a.m. on January 25th, 1917, and demanded an audience with him. And they invited the press, and they made a lot of good points. They said, "Hello, sir. I hear that you would like to help white slaves, vulnerable women. And we are here to tell you that evicting us and criminalizing our livelihood is not going to help us keep or feed our children. We need higher wages for women, right? We need housing. We need healthcare. We need childcare. We need all of the same basic things that we're asking for today." According to contemporary newspaper reports at the time, he was deeply embarrassed, befuddled, made speechless. There was this great moment where he was like, "I can offer you a job." And they were like, "Great. How much does it pay?" And he was like, an absolute pittance, and they all laughed at him.
Love it.
So yeah, and so that confrontation, which happens to be very well documented because of the efforts of the sex worker activists that came before us, happened on January 25th, and they shuttered the brothels on February 14th of that year, less than a month later. And so most of those women's stories have been lost to history. But that guy went on to produce the first religiously funded moving picture in the country, lionizing his efforts as a savior of white slaves by shutting down their brothels, and went on to like have a whole career of like giving speeches and getting people all riled up about not the real problem, and really hurting exactly the people that he said he was sent by God or whatever to help.
Gotta love men.
Yeah. Yeah, I gotta love that. And so it's like that story. I feel like if more people knew that story, then like the Sound of Freedom would not be doing as well as it is in the box office right now. That we would not be considering things like the Earn It Act, right, or Sesta Fosta, or all of these laws that have made it harder for adult consensual sex workers to work safely.
So I've been interested. So there's a strip club in LA, the Star Garden, that just became unionized, and I'm really interested in all that. The unionization can only happen in California because they're employees. Everywhere else, we're independent contractors.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot about labor laws, and obviously, like, full service sex work is not legal, so there's no way you can have any labor like rights around that. So I'm curious because like we always hear that decriminalization is like the best model, or like the model that most sex workers want. But I'm curious, like, if you have any thoughts around like legalization can maybe be a path towards like rights like that, or if it's just like not worth kind of like trading that freedom of decriminalization for those.
Yeah. So I have a lot of thoughts on this. And this is an area of sex work where I feel like smart people disagree. But speaking as somebody who worked as like an independent escort, I really bristle at the idea of regulatory structure and the worker protections that come with that. I think it makes a lot of sense in some contexts. I think strip clubs are a really great example. Like any brick and mortar place, right, where like the workers can get together and demand better conditions. I don't want to get in the way of that. I'm not against organized labor, but we already know what legalization and regulation would look like in this country because we've had it in Nevada since the 70s, right? So Nevada is the only state in the country with legal regulated prostitution, and it has the highest arrest rate per capita for prostitution in the country. And if you look at the regulations, they have nothing to do with increasing the negotiating power of sex workers and everything to do about enforcing these very whorephobic ideas about containment and control and like mandatory STI testing and registry and all of this stuff that just really limits the freedom of movement of sex workers and turns the licensed ones into second-class citizens and creates all of these perverse incentives to crack down harder on the still overwhelmingly criminalized market. So I don't think that like legalization, which I think comes with licensing and registration and all sorts of other things that end up putting us on stigmatized lists, is a good path for us. If we didn't live in a whorephobic society, sure, let's talk about workplace protections. But we do, and so I think we need to collectively resist creating the apparatus that makes that kind of coercive control possible. And so that's why I think it's important for us to think about sex worker rights, not just through the lens of labor rights, but also through the lens of like queer rights, sexual freedom, LGBTQ plus movement, right? Like when we stopped arresting people for having same-sex consensual sex, we didn't make people register or fill out a form or like, right? We just stopped arresting people for consensual sex. And so that feels like the first step. And if we do that, I think that there are parts of sex work that are ripe for unionization, collective organizing, and all of that is made easier when you're not criminalized. But like, and also, even criminalized sex workers find ways to cooperate locally, right? They're sort of
Mhm.
like, people talk about don't charge less than, don't go here,
Mm-hmm.
tell him X. Like there's sort of an irrepressible element to we find ways of supporting each other as a community.
I love that comparison to same-sex consensual sex, because it's like I'd never even thought about it like that way. Like, oh, once we stopped, criminalizing same sex, we didn't make people go on a list and have to like prove that they're
And could you
quote
imagine
unquote
how
safe
dangerous that would
STI-wise.
be had we done that with like watching the pendulum swing now, right?
Mhm.
Like, yeah. And I think
Yeah.
that's my sort of collective critique of like progressive stuff is like,
Mhm.
it doesn't really matter what your intentions are. Think about what you're building.
No, it's super
Yeah.
valid. We had on a guest on this podcast.
I was going to talk
Her name
about
was Vivian,
Yeah.
and because we didn't know too much about the brothels, and
Mhm,
you
mhm.
always hear Nevada legal, and we think yay. And she was
Right.
telling us like the way they crack down on women who are doing sex work outside of the brothels is
Yeah.
so much harsher.
Yes.
And even at the strip club, you know that, right? Because like
Yep.
if you do anything that like hints at sex work at the strip club, because it's not a brothel, they
Right.
take away your license, this and that. But then once we knew like how they really contain them at the brothels,
It is wild. Like for our listeners, I don't know what episode that is, but please go back and listen, because she really gives like an in-depth look at how the actual business works, because she worked at it for several years. I always tell that to people too. It's like, oh, but in Nevada, I'm like, you need to listen to actual brothel workers, because it's fucking insane.
It's fucked up.
and it's like, okay, you have to live at this place. You can't have children. You can't leave.
No, I know people who have lost their kids in child
Yeah.
custody cases because they were a legal registered prostitute in Nevada, right? I know
Mhm.
people like it's no, this is not a system that increases the negotiating power of workers.
I'm trying to think of like any other kind of like scenario in which that would be okay, where you would tell people like, oh, actually these women are not allowed to leave,
I mean,
but they actually have to pay
prison?
for
I guess
for their
yeah.
housing.
Firefighters,
Oh, I guess prison.
maybe. Yeah, like I don't know.
If someone's stuck in a ship, I don't know.
Right. Where you just have to sit
But
here
yeah,
and wait
no, I
around.
mean,
Yeah.
I know, Candy, you're joking, but like, yeah, prison might be like the closest comparison. I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly is not like a liberatory model, right? It's a model that
Yeah.
only benefits the brothel owners.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We did an episode on the history of like how those laws came to be.
Mm.
And knowing that history, it just makes it so clear that it's like a compromise between the FBI and the mafia, two deeply patriarchal institutions that have more in common than they'd like to admit, finding ways of like controlling and profiting off of the labor of this disenfranchised class,
2 days ago, I did a VIP with a guy who works at a labor union.
Mhm.
And it was funny because this old man's by the stage, and I go and talk to him. And as we're talking, he's like, hold on 1 second. And he tips the stage, and he comes back and sits down with me, and he says, I just don't think anyone should be working for free. And I was like, oh,
Yeah,
I
man.
agree with that.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, hell yeah. And then like we're talking, and like slowly he's saying things like, like I really hope they treat you guys like well here. And I'm like, yeah, it's a little exploitative. And we start talking. Turns out he works at a labor union, so he's like
Yeah.
pro workers right or whatever.
Yeah.
And he knows the lawyers who helped unionize the Star Garden in LA and all that stuff. But Candy and I were talking about these strippers, when they unionize, they join like an actors
Yep.
union.
Yep.
And they were kind of really emphasizing the performance art aspect
Yeah.
of the job, and kind of, we thought, to the detriment of like the sex worker part of it, right? Like it was more like we go on stage and we dance, and yeah.
I don't know, actually. Like
Mhm.
I thought even of my like escort work as a performance, but I had come to that work as an actress, so like I was already
Mm.
primed to think of it that way. But I don't know. I'm curious to see how all of this shakes out.
Yeah, and I said that to him, and he was like, well, because I said, well, is a lap dance a performance art? And he was like, yes.
But when does it become, I guess
And
my question is
yeah.
always like, when does it become sex work then? Because it's like, if I am rubbing, because it's like, I've done all different kinds now. It's like, if I am rubbing on a dick through jeans And that is, I consider that sex work if I'm escorting or stripping. I don't know. It's like I'm rubbing on a hard dick. It might come. Sometimes it has, like, well, at the club, but like, yeah.
Yeah, but I don't know. I think it's all art, right? Like, even if you're, even if you're doing it, haphazardly or lackadaisically, or like, just because you're not performing a craft to its highest level or whatever doesn't make it not art. And I think like the presence of erotic energy, like what is every painting of a nude woman like not real art, it's sex art, like like how far do we take this? And so I don't know, I think erotic performance is just as much performance as non-erotic.
So maybe we should think of sex work as an art. Is that kind of what you were saying?
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe, right? Maybe it's an art. Maybe it's a performance. I think that, that union connection makes a lot of sense to me. I also think that sex work and like waiting tables have a lot in common.
Yes.
Like service
That's
industry
what
is
we were
another.
saying. We were saying
Yeah.
it might be more like that. So when I ended up talking to this man, he was like basically saying that just pragmatically, that union that they join is a lot smaller, so they can focus a lot more of their resources on them and make sense. And the reason I even brought this up is because he talked about the Armenian mafia is like really in charge of like all those strip clubs. But I agree, like, because Kenny and I were talking, and it's like feels like we have a lot more in common with like service workers because of all the emotional labor that goes into it. Like would waiting tables where, or like being a bottle service girl where you have to be really flirtatious and be like sexy mommy basically because you're like feeding them, but also you're flirting. Like, would that be a performance art too? Because you're pretending to like these people.
Yeah, but I mean, like, there's just a lot of crossover there too, right? Like, how many actors become waiters, how many waiters become actors. Feels like a transferable skill set. Like, we all play the cards that we're dealt, and I think that there are 1,000 ways of thinking about this and 1,000 ways of coming at it, like there are as many stories and perspectives as there are people. And so, yeah, that's one of the reasons why I sort of bristle against the like labor organizing as mechanism, because it does require an awful lot of like box creation and fitting.
We have never had somebody, and I know you said sugaring has changed now from when you did it, but we've actually never, Jade and I do not do sugaring. We've never had someone who's done sugaring on the podcast. So I would love if you wanted to like get into your experience a little bit and kind of what it was like when you were doing that.
Sure. So, I actually hilariously heard about sugaring from a fellow, aspiring performer, friend of mine in New York, that was like, hey, there's this really cool thing where like people will pay you to date them. And at that point, I'd already done hourly sex work. So I was like, the oldest profession? What are you talking about?
Did you just discover this?
Yeah. What is happening? And so, but at that point, sugaring was really branding itself. Like, I don't remember, was it sugarbaby.com or like, I don't even remember the name.
Seeking arrangement.
Seeking arrangement. Yes. Seeking arrangements. That was it. Yeah.
They just take off the arrangement.
Sure. Fine. But they were really playing a very hard game of this is not prostitution. And so what I watched happen to my civilian friends who did not self-identify as sex workers is that they were being taken on these lavish dates and like having these experiences and coming home without any money in their pocket. And like and sort of being sold this bag of like, I spent $800 on you. And I was like, right, but like we still owe rent. Like, do you see how this isn't? And she was like, well, I'm not a whore. And I was like, that's what's holding you back. And so as somebody who had done hourly sex work before, the way that I was using this resource to operate is I was trying to be very upfront of like, I'm trying to get my monthly needs met so that I can really focus on stand-up comedy, which is what I want to be doing. This is my rent. This is I will not cancel gigs to spend time with you, but I'm happy to work with our schedules and find time to like be together. And I went on, I think it was several first dates, which I did not expect to be paid. This was sort of a mutual get to know you, like pick up the check, but we're going to feel each other out. And I presented this case and like some people were not into it and I was not into some people. And then I had lunch with this guy and we clicked and we made each other laugh, and I felt like he really got it, and he had done this before and seemed to be very proud of like, you know, what the folks that he had supported effectively, like, you know, did with their life. And we went on, this was the only time in my life that I utilized my weird aunt's rules, right? Like she was trying to tell me like the gospel of the rules as a young person. This is a person who, with the QAnon conspiracy theories, who had done stripping and sex work as a young person. Right. Yeah. So yeah, like I made him take me out on like 4 or 5 dates, and we eventually got to a place where we negotiated, you know, a monthly stipend, and we saw each other when we could and sort of operated like a long distance casual couple.
Amazing. And can I ask, did you, and you don't have to answer this, but did you have
Sure.
sex with him as a part of the arrangement?
I did when we saw each other, which was not often, but yes, sex was a part of it.
And
yeah, sex and like
Yeah.
flirting.
I think for us, like at the strip club, there's a lot of negotiations that happen, obviously, you know, because you want to get paid for your services.
Right.
But a lot of the times they have to happen like under the surface. Like you can't just outright be like, hey, if you tip me $100, I'll sit here with you for 30 minutes. Like
Right.
a lot of men like bristle at that.
They
and
want you to
a lot
want
of times
to
I've
sit
been,
there
yeah.
and talk to them. Right.
I've been told so many times, well, I would have tipped you if you hadn't asked, right? I hate that because like sometimes they're like, well, I'm not going to do this. And I'm like, well, I need to leave, but if you want me to stay, you can tip me and I'll
Sure.
stick around. And they're like,
Yeah.
well, I would have, but then you asked.
Right. Yeah.
And
that's all an
yeah.
illusion. They were never going to give you that
Exactly.
money.
Yeah,
That's
100%.
Yeah. Fuck those guys. But I hate it, and I see how that permeates, like, you know, people that are unwilling or unable to identify as sex workers robs them of a lot of their negotiating power. And I think that is by design, right? Because like the second you bring up money, like, hey, I'm an adult person, lives in the world, I'm at work right now. I know this is confusing because like there's so much glitter, but like this is only one of us is partying. And yeah, it's interesting. And so I don't think that I would have been as successful doing sugaring had I not had that experience as an hourly sex worker.
We always think about sugaring, and because we've never done it, we don't exactly know, but like I always think of it as like that would be maybe like the hardest place to negotiate prices like that, because at least today there is more of like a we're dating kind of thing, and breaking the fourth wall of being like, well, I want to get paid exactly this for this act would kind of like ruin that. Whereas like, well, I'm helping you with rent and this and that. Like negotiating those like double speak would like kind of drive me insane.
No, it's you have to use a completely different arsenal of tactics. Like hourly escort work is much more straightforward, but like sugaring effectively like invites the financial manipulation of like the time before women were allowed to have their own credit cards, right? Like it's about articulating need. It's about evoking a sense of purpose. It's about like you have to do all of this stuff, you know. Yeah, my advice to people sugaring is if it feels like sort of slow, the next time he wants to see you, tell him you can't go because you got a job.
Yeah.
And you're not available. That's the answer, right? It's like, oh, how can we make this problem go away? Well, the thing that a job gives me.
Yeah.
Wink.
Yeah, it's
Right.
really disappointing to see the whorephobia within the sugaring community. It kind of I don't like follow this person, but I get a lot of her content on TikTok. Her name is she goes by Shira7, and she essentially promotes this lifestyle without saying it. She's like, here's how to find a man, whatever. I find it's actually very good client advice for like the strip club sex workers. And then I saw a TikTok last week and someone had asked her like, oh, like, should I start an OnlyFans, whatever. She's like, oh no, that's trashy. And I was like, girl,
these are branding choices, not value judgments, right? Like you're not better than anyone.
Right. Exactly. And it's like, you can be like, hey, like, that's not my thing, whatever. But it's like people who do that are also valid. It's just so weird. And Jade and I talk about this a lot.
It goes all ways though. because like even women at the
Oh.
strip club will be like, well, I'm a stripper, she has sex for money. Like it
oh, I
goes,
could
it goes
never
all
do
the different
that. Even
ways.
Oh,
Yeah.
it's wild.
Porn performers, I would never have sex with a non-professional. Escorts, I would never have sex on camera. I mean, like it's in all of the directions, in all of the ways, right? I would never perform for strangers. I would never meet somebody alone in a room, like where everyone gets, this is a choose your own boundaries adventure.
Right.
Or the one that we're seeing right now is I wouldn't do XYZ for less than this
know.
amount.
Right.
Like
the money shaming is
which
just
is
so classist and like
the money
fucked up, and
shaming.
it just like obviously ignores like so much a part of like our society, like who values what because of what
course.
identities. I mean, it's just we talked about Vivian, the brothel worker. She said something that I always say to people. She said, "Slinging pussy is slinging pussy. There's no medal in the what is it? There's no gold medal in the Horror Olympics." That's what she said.
Yep.
I was like, oh, that's such a good quote. I'm gonna say it all the time.
Meeting another whorephobic sex worker is something that's super annoying to deal with, like on an interpersonal level. But I do think it's important to keep in mind that like this is something that the culture we have built aggressively encourages. Like sex workers connecting their whole identity to like earning potential or class or like distance from other sex workers. And I think what I want to stress to sex workers that might be listening is it only feels like you're getting something out of it. But actually, whenever you engage in this, you're fucking yourself. And it's that same example of like just reducing your negotiating power, right? Like anytime that you spend shitting on other sex workers or like engaging in that, it might feel like you're raising your value to like whoever you're interacting with, but you're actually like literally eroding, right, the foundation of your own ability to self-advocate.
That is very, very good advice.
Right. Like the people in power are not going to be making these distinctions that we seem to be making. Like we're
all
sluts.
whores,
Yeah.
everybody.
Yeah. So
yeah. If you have any questions about that, like just check out what's happening to the Log Cabin Republicans. They are having a time.
I was going to ask about if you have any like specific projects that you're like the most passionate about right now. Like we know you've talked about your general work and stuff, but like share some about that.
Yes, I'm so excited. So I have been working on this show, Whore's Eye View, since 2019, and it is a combination of really all of the work that I've done. I'm so proud of the show, and so I'm trying to take it to festivals. I'm taking it on tour. Please sign up for our email list so you could like stay in the know like an old pro. Like yes, you'll get sex worker news, but you'll also get tour dates and find out like when I am bringing this huge project to your city. But I'm super proud of it. It's 10,000 years of history in 75 minutes. It's stand-up comedy. It's a lecture like with a slide deck and an annotated bibliography, and it's like very personal storytelling where I really aim for this dichotomy of like the way that we think and talk about soldiers and my father's story, and the way that we think and talk about sex workers and my story.
That is incredible.
Love it. Where do people sign up for the newsletter?
Oh, yeah. You can find everything at oldprosonline.org. Sign up for our newsletter. Consider supporting the work with a tax-deductible donation. And please, 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 if I'm in your city, come out and see the show. I'm so proud of it, and I want to share it with the whole world.
Are you currently performing the show or any stand-up in New York, like on a regular, semi-regular basis?
We don't have any dates on the calendar yet. The next event we have is the Cannonball Fringe Festival in Philadelphia, September 24th, 25th, and 26th. Definitely taking it back on the West Coast, and then I'm sure we'll have another run here in New York soon.
Wow. Thank you so much. This past hour is just, you answered all of our questions.
It's been great.
In such an amazing, funny, educational way. And we just really appreciate you coming on and lending us an hour of your time.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really been a delight and an honor to be here.
Right. And then you can find your old pros on Instagram, right?
Yeah, Old Pros Online on Instagram, oldprosonline.org. If you search Old Pros, we come up very fast.
Yes.
So,
y'all.
Yeah, and listen to the podcast. It's like super
the podcast
interesting.
Thank
and
you.
You feel like you're learning. So you are learning, but I just feel like it's like NPR, but like sex worker.
Oh, nice. I love that. Yeah. We're about to start releasing episodes for our 5th season in September. So
exciting.
we look forward to that. I'm very proud of it.
That is so amazing. Very inspirational for us, baby podcasters
Thank
who
you.
are just getting started.
All right, everyone, rate, review, and subscribe. And
We'll see you next
week.
time. Bye.
Bye.